Okay, thank you for that introduction. I'd like all of us to introduce ourselves, but I think I'll get started. So my name is Nalin Advani. I am an early stage investor in startups. I wear multiple hats. So I run a few incubation type organizations. I'm also on the board of a very large Japanese software systems integration company. So I go kind of end to end from early stage startup founder, investor, all the way across to corporate governance in large corporations. I'm a resident of both Japan and Singapore. I love technology and the impact it has on our lives. I'm delighted to be here, and I would like to then ask the panelists today to introduce themselves as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Ottey. I'm the Global Head of Centers and Labs for CAC, Cambridge Innovation Centers. I am actually based out of our Philadelphia location, which is our largest life science campus, where we support wet labs as well as office and meeting spaces. CAC is located, we have a global network. We're located in Cambridge and Boston, Massachusetts, Providence, Rhode Island, St. Louis, Missouri, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And then in Europe, we have centers in Rotterdam, in Berlin, and in Warsaw. And then here in Japan, we have centers in Tokyo and here in Fukuoka, which is our newest. We just announced that we'll be opening next year in Osaka, and that too will be a life science focused campus. So basically, we provide co-working, office space, wet labs in some locations, and we support everyone from startup entrepreneurs that would be a single user to those who are, getting their seed funding through Series A and Series B. We support through the scale-up stage. And CACU's magic is really not just about space, it's about the community and collaboration that we provide, and we are all about convening and networking. So that's what we do.
Hi there, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gail Gannon, and it's an honor and pleasure to be here and to actually have an opportunity to meet some of the startups as well as some of the investors from different parts of the world. So I wear several hats, and just like many of us do from Silicon Valley. And so I run an organization called Ensanté. It typically focuses on early stage, what I would call responsible technology. So everything from biotechnology, ag tech, mobility, smart city technology. We are advisors. Our goal is to help people typically from other cross-borders interests to try to look at the US market and to help establish US market traction. My other hat is that I also am an educator. I'm at UC Berkeley and the College of Engineering. I run the NeuroTech Collider Lab there, where we teach entrepreneurship for aspiring students. And again, we're the third year in the role. UC Berkeley, according to PitchBook, for the largest number of funded startups. So that's something to be proud of. The institution as well is quite aligned with the kind of work that we do with Ensanté. In fact, we have this dual relationship where my business Ensanté and UC Berkeley have a partnership where we work with QB3, which is a part of Baker Bio Labs. And the idea of that is to go from cradle to crypt, in essence, to take translational or opportunities for translational ideas from the bench to science into commercialization. And we help these particular aspiring entrepreneurs develop that path and strategy, everything from intellectual property to looking at the competitive landscape, and particularly these days for aspiring entrepreneurs to look at alternative business models. So it's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you all for the opportunity to be here. I'm Caleb. The quick on me is entrepreneur turned investor. I've founded about a dozen companies, the first of which was a restaurant. I was a chef. I don't recommend it again. That was tough. I went on and studied science and then spun a stem cell company out of my PhD. Running a biotech and running a kitchen are actually very, very similar. I ran that for about a decade, and then I transitioned over to the investor side of the table. I work with Beyond Next Ventures, Tokyo-based fund. I split my time between Tokyo and Silicon Valley. I actually had a company in QB3 for a while. We were there.
That's how you and I met.
Yes.
Over a decade ago. Yeah.
And so I work with Beyond X Ventures, Deep Tech Fund. I'm sure many of you already know of Beyond X Ventures. I also work with a Dubai-based fund called Crescent Enterprise. Invests also in deep tech and a bunch of other areas. I'm very excited to be here and very excited to talk about this topic with everyone. Thank you.
So thank you. Thanks for the intros. I think one element that we see, and nobody's really talked about it yet, so I'm going to call it out, right? Which is in life sciences and biotechnology and anything to do with healthcare, the time spans are different, right? Most of us, when we come from startup, we're like, look, how do we get from, from idea to POC in 6 months, maybe 9? How do we get from POC to first product release in another 6 months? And how do we scale, 3 by 2 after that for the next, for the next 5 years, right? And that whole scalability thing, by 5 years, you're a mature company. You've raised your Series B and you're looking for an exit, right? Life sciences is not about that. It's a very different game. And so I want that to be a little bit our entry point, because that also tells you a little bit about the thought processes and the collaborations that happen here to make idea become a reality, to make a research project into something that's financially, ethically, and socially viable. Right? So I'm putting that out there, and I'm going to just ask all three of us to talk, all three of you to mention where you fit into that whole life cycle and how you see collaboration. Yeah, I think we start with Gail, actually.
Sure, happy to do so. So I have the pleasure and challenge of actually working with very young and aspiring students at one side of my hat, where they're at the ideation stage. And so it's an opportunity to give them a broader lens and looking at the overall ecosystem before they even take that idea or some thought of an idea, and how that might look like in the broader scheme of things, whether it's building technology within that country or across borders. So that's one of the aspects. The other thing that I have the pleasure of doing is that we're really interested in cross-disciplinary learning. And as a product of that, and I'd love to hear what you folks have to say, I'm very bullish in seeing how there's a collision of technology that's happening. So everything from looking at the big elephant in the room, the agentic AI and its application, and how that fast tracks drug discovery and drugs development side, to other aspects of looking at how we can see where there's what I would call mixed modality, and how it's so one of the spaces that I used to play in way back when I first met you was in the area of digital health, and now it moved to digital therapeutics, and now looking at that instead of other kinds of more traditional wet lab technology, and using that as a more of it becomes the sort of first point of actually intervention, and that's new.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Michelle.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to think about life cycles.
Yeah.
And I'll speak about CIC, but also just shared spaces in general. When you are able to be a part of a community like a CIC campus, it is lowering barriers to entry for these companies and also sort of de-risking for investors, because the entrepreneurs, the founders, are able to sort of stretch their capital on their research and development or personnel, really invest in talent rather than investing in the infrastructure, because we're providing that, or a shared space is providing that for you. In the life sciences, we have supported scientists, everything from a single bench user up through multiple lab users who were ready to sort of spin up and grow out into their own spec suites or into their own spaces. So I can talk about one example is Century Therapeutics. They started with us in 2019 in Philadelphia with 3 individual benches in the shared lab. Because they had access to over $4 million worth of equipment through our sponsorships with various companies, such as Thermo Fisher or Miltenny, they didn't have to invest in that equipment. So they could very quickly invest in talent and put that money back into their research. So within 4 years, they scaled up and grew up and graduated, which is the dream. They took 3 floors in a building that was built right behind us. So not only were we able to support them through their journey, help them out with equipment, they were then able to be a part of the greater ecosystem by taking space in a new build. So it's supporting these companies in the ecosystem that they're a part of, but then also keeping them in the city location where you are so that your economy can benefit from them.
So my takeaway on this one, Michelle, is not only is life sciences very time intensive, in other words, the time it takes from lab to realizing profits is very long, but it's also capital intensive as you scale the business. And some of the value you're bringing to them is they can deploy their resources in people rather than in infrastructure and equipment.
That's exactly right. We'll provide everything from the copy machines and Wi-Fi to bananas and grapes in the kitchen.
Yeah, awesome. Very good. Thanks for that. Caleb.
So, I mean, the quick answer is I'm your ticket to money. I write checks. But if I'm doing my job well, the least valuable thing I actually bring to the table is the money. Right now, I'm an early stage investor. We typically, our first money in will be low single digits, but I've made about 30-some investments over my career, up to about $250 million single investment. I do better at the early stage, and I'll tell for all the people out there that are raising money, I'll give you a little bit of a secret behind the stages of the VC's job. I look at, and it's a fun job, by the way, very fun job. I enjoy it. I will look at somewhere between 300 and 500 deals per year. I will put maybe 40 to 50 of them into bona fide due diligence, and I will make 1 or 2 investments per year. So what that means is I am breaking up, I am saying no to 99% of the people I meet. That is the worst part of the job. I would love to invest in all of the companies or a majority of the companies I see, but I don't have the opportunity because we have limited resources and I have a responsibility to the investors' money that we're investing. So back to your question of where do I fit into the ecosystem, I was an entrepreneur for 20 years before I turned into an investor. And I think that sort of operator to investor gives you a superpower. My biggest superpower is empathy. I've been in your shoes. I know how hard it is. I've been on the receiving end of those 99% rejections more times than I can count. And there are ways that you can add value other than the money and try and help or introduce to friends and help you get from your Series A to your Series B to your Series Grape to your whatever it may be as you're moving on.
Yeah, so I was thinking while I was listening to you, right? I mean, that size of the funnel, we're looking at the short list is less than 10%.
1%.
The short list, I'm looking at the short, so from 400 to 10%, I think is what you said.
1%.
We'll go about 300 to 500, and there's kind of different levels of due diligence. And this is a typical funnel for most VCs. Per partner, you'll see about 300 to 500 deals. You'll put 40 to 50 into due diligence. You'll take maybe 10 to 15 to the IC, and you'll make 1 or 2 investments per year.
So 0.5% actual investment from the whole funnel, right? So
that's per partner.
Per partner. And you have about, what, maybe 10 partners?
Depends upon the fund size, so,
true.
You can have, or how it's set up, but, you have 5 to 20 partners per fund.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Michelle.
yeah, Kayla, I have a follow-up for you. So in thinking about the sort of swings that happen in trends of what gets funded, I'm thinking about life science. Cell and gene therapy had a big boom about a decade ago, and they were getting, billions of dollars a year going into that. And what we've seen in the past 4 years is a significant decrease, like maybe 50% of the money going to cell and gene therapy companies. And that amount that it's decreased, we're seeing that has increased in things like longevity, aging, or weight loss. And how can founders sort of prepare their pitch in a way that is following those trends and get funding, even if they're not necessarily part of the most popular sort of trendy the science?
This is a great question, and I have two ways to answer that. I have a way to answer that as a previous founder who's raised money, and I have a way to answer that as the investor. And I'll start with the founder. If you're a founder out there, ignore the trends. Just completely ignore it. For you, everything is binary. You go forward. You make your startup, your technology, whatever, and find the investors that resonate with you. It is kind of we would call it in English, a frog kissing exercise, in that you're gonna have to meet with a lot of people. You're gonna have to deal with a lot of rejection, and you just move on. The most amazing investments are the ones that are usually the most controversial. So 4 of my investments have turned out to be unicorns. And at the time of making the investment, it was not in that trend. It was outside of the trend. It was different. And we, especially at the early stage, and this as a PhD student turned entrepreneur, this was tough to me too. The way investors look at, especially early stage, we evaluate a bunch of things, and it is in this order. Team, first. Market, second. Business model, deal, and then 5th, technology. Like we invest more in the team and last in the technology. And when I came out of Stanford with my company, that was why it should be all about the tech. And the reason is, we understand that research changes. What you're building an orange today, and it could be a grape or an apple tomorrow. And the market changes. And so we know that the technology is not fully vetted, is not fully there today. If it was, you wouldn't be talking to me. I wouldn't have an opportunity to invest and make money. But we're looking for the teams and the founders and the people that can navigate those challenges that are gonna come up. When the experiments come back negative, how do you pivot? How do you work around that? How do you ebb and flow with that? And that's more the team. And then second, the market. I mentioned to you my first company was a restaurant. And then turned out to be my 4th company was a biotech. I worked the same amount. I lost the same amount of hair with both of those companies. It's the same amount of work. One of them had the potential to be $1 billion company. The other, never, right? And so it's what are you going after? And the VC has to make that return. So back to your thing of what's the trend, it's more show us that the market potential is there.
So can I add to that? So one of the things, right, it's not only important to gauge the market trend, but as a founder to be really clear about what your core competencies are and stay within that lane. Because sometimes what happens is that if you become everything to everybody, you're not going to be anything to anybody, right? So it's really, to leverage that and to understand what you're really good at, and then from things that you're not really good at is to rest where you go out and reach partners, right? So at that point, like when you're mixing apples and oranges and grapes, right? You're getting different people with different kinds of core competencies to create that team. That's what's going to give you a lot of the substantial to be able to anticipate as market changes, then you can be able to respond to that. So I would like to sort of emphasize more of that. And so as you as founders think about growing your team, is to look what core competencies you bring to the table and what other team members bring to the table. That's really salient, and that's what's going to drive success.
So, and I totally get your point, Caleb, about not looking at trends. But there's one trend I do want to put out here, okay? Which is, if I think back, if I zoom back or zoom out to 20, 30 years ago, innovation in life sciences was in the domain of big pharma, big companies. If you wanted to innovate, you needed the labs because you didn't have CIC to support you with the infrastructure.
Or
you
other
didn't
incubators.
You
There's other
didn't have
incubators.
Caleb to finance you, right? So if you had, if you wanted to make a difference in the world, if you had an idea, if your research was good, you were better off being in big pharma because that was, in some ways, your only option. And then a few things happened. I don't know if this is the right example, but the one that comes to mind is companies like Genentech, a startup that went out and said, no, we're not going to be part of big pharma. We're going to raise money We're going to invest in our own labs. We're going to go to market. We're going to do trials. We know it's a long game. We know it's a long uphill battle, but we're going to do it. And they did it. And I think that one company probably set off a chain of other companies.
Absolutely.
Right?
And can I make one little clarification?
Yes.
I didn't say don't look at trends. I said ignore them. You need to look at them. You need to know them.
Fair.
You need to be cognizant of it. But don't let it dissuade you from moving forward or being a little bit out of the pack.
And I mean, to be fair, you're talking about trends in terms of which domain to go after, which therapies to build, which disease you might
Platform versus
right.
pipeline, or
right. And whereas I'm looking at really zoom out. Do we stay in a big company and get guided by their principles, or do we do a startup, basically, right?
Yeah. Well, a lot of the big pharma now are depending on the smaller companies for several reasons, for being nimble and the fact that their commercial pipelines are going out and some of their patents have expired. So all those things happen, sort of confluences of energy where they need smaller startups such as yourself, founders who have some interesting ideas that they can bring to bear, because they don't have that opportunities.
I do think some of the pharma companies are still doing, investing a lot in their R&D. One example, CSL Behring had an innovation lab that in our space, separate from their big campus in Pennsylvania, because they didn't want the scientists to sort of be pulled into other projects, so they isolated them. And that was really successful for them. Their separate innovation lab was able to do a lot more work than when it was integrated within the regular R&D campus. That said, they moved to Germany and changed everything. But some of the companies are still investing. You have Johnson & Johnson with J Labs, but even that is an opportunity for them to use other founders and startups and to own that IP and that tech. All of the, maybe not all, but the majority of companies that we have in Philadelphia in cell and gene therapy, and those in St. Louis, which are a lot of ag tech and food tech and some neuroscience, they're really working to be acquired. They're working to develop technologies or therapies, treatments that are going to be acquired by one of these bigger companies. Even Spark Therapeutics, which was the first FDA-approved gene therapeutic in the US, they were then acquired by Roche. So, and they had built a whole campus in Philadelphia, which is exciting.
And in the information technology industry, that's been, Cisco has grown through acquisition. Cadence, Synopsys, the chip design companies, that's what they did. And, like Gail said, they kind of let a few of their teams go out there, innovate with the tacit understanding that if they do something good, we will acquire you, right? And that was, nobody ever wrote that down, but everybody understood that innovation, right, through acquisition is a valid path forward. And as innovation became more and more expensive, and as the need to have the right choice became more and more difficult, I think this trend kind of took off, right? Caleb.
Totally agree, and kind of doubling down on what we're saying here. For the last at least 10 and I think maybe 20 years, over half of FDA-approved medical interventions started through a startup. A lot of the big pharma players have realized that the startup, for a lot of reasons that we could go into, are much better at innovating. They're much more nimble, and the big pharma companies with their billion-dollar balance sheets are way better at acquiring it later when it's been de-risked, typically a phase 2B clinical trial, and funding the last mile. And this is a difference between biotech and other industries in the US and globally, where it's almost certain your biotech company is going to result in an M&A.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll IPO before it M&As.
Right.
In the US, the IPO is not the exit. It is just another financing event. Usually the exit for the investors and the founders is really that M&A. And you need that depth of capital to get there. And so there is a very strong collaboration between the investor, the entrepreneur, and the biotech companies. Like when we are looking at diligencing something, we will absolutely not share any confidential information, but we'll knock on the door of our pharma and biotech friends and be like, is this of interest to you? What would you want to see if you were going to acquire it? And if I'm doing my job right, after I make the investment, I'm either on your board or I'm a dial away, and I help you connect with those people. I help you develop the stuff in the means and the way that they want to see it, so that go-to-market and that ultimate exit is kind of greased.
And actually behooves the founders to do the same, to actually have those conversations early on to understand what you're tooling toward. Because if you don't know what the end is in mind, then you're going to make some product that's not going to be what you're looking for in the first place.
And that's why founders need you, right? Honestly, so many of the founders that we work with are not necessarily primed to deliver that information in a palatable way that's really desirable. You know, they need that training. Your communication skills are as important as your scientific knowledge or your technical skills.
Yes, thank you.
I mean, I have so many questions. Time is our enemy here. We don't have much here, but I have so many questions on this. And if I had to narrow it down to a couple, one is, in terms of like corporate venture capital, like in the information technology world, you have, big companies saying we're going to give money to a VC, and the VC will deploy that capital on their behalf and facilitate the innovation pipeline. I don't know if this is happening in life sciences, but it sounds like a space that it seems to be a little bit untouched and perhaps underutilized.
There's an awful lot of corporate venture capital in the life sciences area, and there's different. And if you are raising money, it is quite important to really understand where that money comes from, because all money comes with some strings, and some of them are better or worse. There's no right or wrong, and it really depends upon what you're raising towards. And there's two general types of CVCs. There's just the straight, like M Ventures, which is from Merck, or SR1 that is GSK. But then there's like Global Brains, which is a collection of a lot of different people together, and it changes. Their money is strategic, not so much financial. And what that means is they're less interested in return on investment or making financial returns, but they're more interested in ultimately acquiring the technology or using that vehicle for market intelligence. So they could be a great partner, they could be your competitor, and they have really deep pockets.
Well, one of the things that we've noticed, if you look at 2024's trends, right, $57 billion has been spent in healthcare, just hands down, over half of which is on the biopharma side. What's really interesting that's changed, to your point, is that over half of that is crossover investor money. So it's not strictly just biopharma now. These are other types of investors and looking for different asset classes to be able to explore, whether it's to build out their portfolio, diversify the portfolio, de-risk their portfolio, or maybe to use them as a way to build out their pipeline.
That's a really interesting one, because, I mean, typically, the time spans in healthcare are long, right? And if money is coming from outside the industry,
that's right.
There are people who are probably more used to shorter time spans, but they're willing to take that. They're willing to wait longer because it's either a more sure bet, or the payouts, the returns are that much exponentially larger. So okay, we're putting money in, we'll wait longer, but if we get a hit, it's going to be a mega hit kind of thing.
That's biotech. You either strike out or you hit a home run.
That's right.
That's pretty much biotech.
There's very rarely anything in between.
So it's part of a diversification strategy.
It is, and it depends upon. So the Dubai group that I work for, it is corporate venture capital. It's fundamentally oil money. It's a $300 billion fund, and we invest in a diversified area. There is all of the biotech stuff has zero interest to a petroleum company, but it has significant interest to the founders and the family behind it. And so while that one is corporate venture capital, technically, there's no strategic interest. It's all, these
personal.
Are the things we want. It's personal. It's kind of this weird amalgamation between a family office and CVC. But
I think a family office is, personally, I think a family office behaves very differently than a CVC.
They all
for the reason you said. The strategic interest is not the
But
priority
they
here.
are patient money.
It's patient,
It's patient money, though.
Yes.
That's the nice part because it matches the development
Yeah,
cycle.
makes
right?
sense. Michelle, did you have a thought you wanted to? All right, so that was one observation I just wanted to tap into, right? Then we have Moderna. It's a very interesting company that kind of got lucky. My words, okay, not anybody else. My words, kind of got lucky with COVID. Just a quick show of hands. Who's aware of Moderna? Moderna, 日本語で言うと in Japanese, ne? So they're one of the companies that had the vaccine for COVID. They happened to get the research done at the right time, but perhaps the funding and the structure in which they got their funding and the structure in which they operate is quite unique. So would any of you want to share what you observe about them?
That was a 15-year overnight success. So yeah, Moderna is a flagship pioneering company. Flagship Pioneering is now, it's about a $4 billion AUM firm, but it is a venture creation. And venture creation is very different than venture investing. So in addition to putting in the money, they put in the management team. So it was kind of all in-house build, and they were building and building and building for a long time. And it is a question, if were it not for COVID, if Bob Langer would be a billionaire now, and they would have had such success. But they did. And a lot of venture capital is different than private equity or public investing. We are supposed to invest ahead of the trend, ahead of what's happening. And if we're doing our job right, we're preempting that. So what is trendy today, I should have invested in 5 years ago.
Well, in some respect, you actually are creating markets, right? I mean, to be fair, right? Having great scientists and scientists who have a certain amount of patient capital, you're actually helping to create some of those trends. And so, to the advice I would offer some of the startups here, if you haven't had a chance to look at where those trend lines are, if they're not publicly made, look at what some of the major corporate venture capitalists are investing in. Look at their pipelines. Look at what their portfolio stands for. Look at those are the trends that are going to be set in the next 10 or 15 years.
Great advice.
I think another topic that's related to this with Moderna as an example is they were supposed to receive a large amount of funding from the federal government to develop the avian flu vaccine. And because of that, they had this potential influx of capital, and they were trying to do they had done some acquisitions of some smaller companies. One was Charisma Therapeutics that had been working on, it was a cell and gene therapy company that was doing solid and blood cancer, solid tumor and blood cancer research with CAR T therapy. And they had made an investment in that company. Well, when the administration changed in the United States, that money was basically pulled, and they lost that potential revenue stream. And so that smaller companies, several of the smaller companies that they had acquired the IP from, have shuttered. And so the impact of what's happening in the US right now with funding, federal funding specifically, NIH funding, SBIR grants, that's negatively impacting and creating some serious headwinds for research. It's putting universities at risk. It is impacting doctoral students, postdocs, PIs, everybody in the pipeline. But one of the things in our prep call that we talked about was where there are headwinds in one place, maybe that means there could be tailwinds in another. And are there potential opportunities then for researchers and or companies at various stages to consider exporting themselves to another location where there is better funding for them?
I think it's already happening. What are you observing here? Gail, did you wanted to?
Well, I was just going to say, so here we are in Fukuoka, right? This is an opportunity. You are well known for your biomanufacturing. You're well known for some of your starting the bioinformatics, starting to see some areas, epigenetics, some work here, right? So the fact that gene editing, right? A lot of the technology you have here can be leveraged, and this is where I think the city is well poised, an opportunity to actually reach out to some of the collaboratives across other academic universities to do that cross-border development. And this is where I think this is a high value, right? And this is where the tailwinds happen, right?
I completely agree. Innovation, in my mind, is fundamental to the human condition. I don't think Silicon Valley people innovate any more than any other city or any other place on the planet, literally the whole planet, per capita. But in order to be successful in a venture, you need innovation and execution. One alone is not enough. You need both. And execution absolutely concentrates in certain areas with certain resources. And now, with AI and with all these tools, you can access that everywhere. I remember 10, 15 years ago, my first contract with a Japanese entity, the only thing I translated was how much money they were going to pay me and what I needed to do. And I ignored the rest of the contract and I just signed it. Now, and it turned out it was good. They treated me well. Everything worked out. I did the job okay. They had me back. But now I can, for $20 a month with ChatGPT, I can redline a Japanese contract and convert it into German or Greek or Swahili and not need any lawyers. There is a time right now that the way companies and the way innovation is going to happen is very, very, very different. The way we build companies 5 years from now will not represent what we did 5 years ago, and you can tap into all of those global areas.
So that's it's a very deep subject. I also know that conversation happens in many, many, many different places. But we have three experts here. So very specifically from the three of you, what will generative or agentic AI do for life sciences? With examples.
You want to go, Michelle? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, it's completely changing the game for drug discovery. You know, machine learning is allowing companies to, there's a company actually in Philadelphia that is getting a lot of attention, and forgive me, I'm literally forgetting the name of them, but what they're doing is, the founder had a rare brain tumor, and he suffered through it and, survived, because they repurposed a treatment from another disease. And so he's like, wait, why are people not doing this? So using AI models, they're basically like combing through years of retired old medicine models to repurpose them, and using machine learning and AI to, see if a biosimilar makes sense, to see if it will interact with the right receptors on the right type of cell to potentially repurpose it. I think it's completely changing the game. It's not replacing the human element. It's actually making humans more effective.
Accelerating, isn't it? I think it's accelerating.
They're definitely accelerating it actually changes your strategy altogether. So one of the things that the US FDA and a number of other countries are looking at in terms of harmonization of data is that now you've had an opportunity. Actually, you have no excuse. It's part of your strategy for development to market. You need real world data and real world evidence, right? It can be happening in real time. So it changes the way you've structured your clinical trials. It changes the way you capture information, how it's stored. It improves security opportunities. And as is important, along the lines of parallel in terms of drug development, is that you have an opportunity to create a digital twin, right? Which we've never had before, right? So finding ways to fast track in early ways to whether or not these targets actually work or mechanisms of actions could possibly work, and being able to model that through can never happen before. So for all you founders out there, there's absolutely no excuse to not integrate and use these kinds of agentic AIs or RAG AIs to actually integrate into your actual strategy now. And in fact, if you don't, you're going to miss out.
Yeah. Really quickly, just to mention, the company is EveryCure, and they're doing really incredible work. The founder was actually just listed in Time's 100 Most Influential People Yeah, it's an incredible company, and they've won a lot of acclaim recently. Just really quickly, you mentioned clinical trials. It's also going to change that. We're already seeing that people are able to make better choices for the population of people that you're going to utilize in your clinical trials based on everything from their genomics to their epigenetics. Jinx.
I think AI and agentic AI is simultaneously going to change everything and also overhyped right now. We are in a bubble. There's a lot. But to your question, what I think it does, I think it better enables the technical founder. Previously, you needed to access a good CFO, a good general counsel, a lawyer. You don't need that. I can have I can give my basic spreadsheet and have ChatGPT or Gemini give me a P&L and a cash flow and teach me all this stuff that previously I needed to like knock on the door of some MBA student or somebody to build that for me. So I think the technical founder becomes more of a super founder. And what we're looking at, and some of my friends are looking at, is these more AI native company builds. And the most obvious, when we're looking at in the org chart and stuff, who is the most easy to fully replace with AI? The answer is the CEO, actually. The CEO is the easiest one to get rid of, but you'll never actually get rid of the CEO because as the investor and on your board, you need some throat to choke if things go wrong. I mean that jokingly, but you should have an agent that's your chief of staff that's dealing with all of these kind of back office little stuff that used to take a while to figure out, your legal compliance, your all of that stuff. You can push a button and get an answer to that. And that, I think, it should provide extreme capital efficiency, cap table efficiency, and be superpower for the technical founders.
There's one more I would like to add here. For sure, Caleb, right? The non-core tasks you have to tackle as a founder can be offloaded onto what we call AI. I prefer to look at it as machine learning because I'm going to bring up a company. A friend of mine actually is the founder of a company called Whole Musk, right? And their product is called NeuroBlue. And what they're trying to do is, like we can do with diabetes and many other diseases, we can quantify, we can measure it. We can say your A1C, your hemoglobin A1C is 6.7. Oh, it's worse than last month because last month it was 6.2, for example. We can't do that with mental health because we don't have data sets. And Whole Musk is they've been building the data sets now they acquired a data set from Duke University that's 10 years old, and they've been refining this for now the last 5 years. And they're getting closer and closer to something where we're going to be starting to find ways to quantify mental health. It's still not completely there.
So I run the NeuroTech Collateral Lab at UC Berkeley, right? And so I'm very bullish on this. I think that we're not too far from a digital phenotype, right? And that means taking different various biometrics throughout the day, everything from gait, walk, speech, eye movement, to vernacular use of words, right? Recall, all those components, right, can actually help build digital phenotype now around the mental health or behavioral health space. So
mental health and neurodegenerative diseases.
Absolutely.
All of them. This is a big frontier. We have my prior fund, we have a pretty big investment in a company called PhenoAI that is in Japan and in Israel. This is a huge area. What is limiting it, though, and why I think there's big challenges for the US here is in order to have your AI really be supercharged, you want to collect and connect all of the data, right? All of the health data, all of that information, and then Dr. AI should be able to figure it out. In the US, there's laws preventing me from connecting this and that or sharing that. And so the US, this is to your headwinds, tailwinds point, the US is probably going to be slower to connect that stuff, whereas other areas, other jurisdictions that don't have the legal impediments to connecting that data can move ahead.
And or where there are health systems that are centralized, national health care, things like that, where records are kept, And whereas in the US, everything is sort of segmented.
Right. It's hard for proprietary. It's hard when you have silos.
So, folks, you know, we have a wonderful conversation going here. I'm looking that way, and I'm about to beg our hosts for a little more time, but I know that wouldn't be fair because we have one more panel after this. Sure. I do want to make one statement before I ask each participant to give a closing statement. My observation is that with the headwinds, tailwinds thing that you just mentioned, Japan, from an AI and machine learning point of view, actually is purposefully keeping things not so strict. It understands as a country that AI is still very new and we have to allow for experimentation. And so while they will not come out and officially tell us this, the guardrails are there, but the guardrails are not as strict as they might be in other countries. So if you are doing something that's AI related in healthcare, this is the place to be. That's kind of my observation that I want to share with everybody. And with that, I'm going to ask each one of us to give a closing statement, a call to action, an insight you'd like to share before we hand it back to the Ramentech folks.
I'm happy to start. I think as we're looking ahead, the success of biotech or really any industry, it's not necessarily only going to be measured by the science or technology alone. It's really how well we connect all of these things, and I think that has been a thread through our conversation tonight. It's how we connect the science or tech to the capital, how we can then connect it to the communities. I like using, one of my colleagues uses from the bench to the bedside. I like from the pipette to the patient, because I was a bench scientist. You know, but thinking about those connections, and I think by really investing in ecosystems and growing ecosystems like they're doing here in Fukuoka with things like tax benefits or deregulation, investment into startups, being a part of a mature ecosystem where there's infrastructure for you, it's going to de-risk you as a company for future investment. So I think it's, again, just to tie it back to CIC, it really is all about connection.
What I would say similar is begin with the end in mind. That's something that we always try to be very clear about. If you don't know where, you know where you're going to end up, you're not going to know where you start, right? So with that said, one of the things that I would like to wholly encourage not just here, but the people in Japan in general, is to be more comfortable with taking risks and the whole adage about fail early and fail fast, and be okay about that, and learning from that. And with that said too, is having more, I would call porous borders, and being open to collaboration and being open to not knowing, and to explore the not knowing, and to be able to share that not knowing, because you'll learn a lot faster. So coachability around that, this is my advice on my side of it, right? And then the final thing that I would say is that one of the unusual aspects about the Japanese education that we hope to see, that I feel that has been one of the major impediments in other countries that is starting to break down now, is looking at more cross-disciplinary studies, okay? If you haven't taken more art, more music, outside of your science, more literature, learning how to write well, he's a good writer, right? Is that'll speak volumes in terms of your ability to communicate, right? And I think that's going to be a new challenge. I think as the educational system needs to change, not just in US, but in other countries too. But as you out here, when you go out and seeking your own self-education as great founders, to really think about that in cross-disciplinary. I can't tell you. I wish I had told my younger self that and knew that I was beneficial in doing so, right? Okay, thank you.
Venture is hard. There's no fully sane person that would found a company. It is difficult. I've seen many successes and many failures, many of them at my own hands. The number one determinant of success that I have seen is perseverance and persistence. If you see it, if you found it, just push it forward and keep going day by day, and you will find success.
And you will crush it just like grapes.
Guys, we've run out of time, but I have to say thank you so much to all three of you. I think you've shared so much insight. This has really been a valuable session. I'm requesting the audience here to let's share a little appreciation for our three panelists. They were awesome. So thank you very much.